So I am delighted to be here and to moderate a conversation with Congressman Kilmer, who's been a great friend of Convergence. And I'm going to share a little bit about your background. We only have 45 minutes, so I'm going to stick to the short bio, if that's okay.
It all began.
Right, exactly. So we know that Congressman Kilmer serves as the U.S. representative of Washington's 6th District. He has had a long and successful career working in economic development in many roles, from working as a business consultant for McKinsey to serving on a local economic development board. He's then served in Washington State House and Senate, and now serves in the U.S. House of Representative, has been in that role since 2012. In his time in Congress, he's accomplished and championed many bipartisan proposals, including his work on the Bipartisan Working Group, which is really how we got to know you through your work on the budget reform process. The congressman has learned that addressing the challenges facing our nation will require an end to the political brinkmanship and a focus on finding common sense political solutions. We agree with you. So I want to actually start there and dig into what a bipartisan approach looks like right now in Congress. I think Rob really teed up the conversation well about the political divisions that are happening right now in our country. And there are lots of different points of view on sort of how did we get here? Is it because so many moderate members of Congress are resigning? Is it because we have the president and folks on the other side of the aisle that are stirring up their political bases? Or is it simply because Congress is a microcosm of what's happening across the entire country, right? But however we got here, I think that there's a sense that members of Congress are not treating each other with the respect and the civility that they once were. So my question to you is, what has been your experience? Have you seen the tenor in Washington change? And how do we come back? And if so, how do we get back to a place where Congress can work together and get stuff done for the American people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and thanks to Convergence for trying to solve some of these problems and work with others to solve them. March the 3rd of 2012, I got a call from my predecessor, a guy named Norm Dix, who had represented me from the time I was 3 years old. And he said, in about an hour, I'm going to announce that I'm not seeking re-election, and you should think about whether you want to do this job. And once I regained consciousness, I called my wife up and said, we should go out for dinner. And we had the longest and most serious conversation of our marriage. And we're nerds, so we wrote the pro and the con list. And I'll tell you the top of the pro list, and I'll tell you the top of the con list. The top of the pro list was easy, and that was I felt like we had to get people working. I represent a district that is not Seattle. I represent Tacoma and the Olympic Peninsula. And unfortunately, in a lot of the communities I represent, there's a real concern that our primary export is going to be young people. Mm-hmm. And so that was what I spent my adult life working on. When I was in college, my senior thesis was how do you help timber towns in Washington State, and then worked in economic development professionally. It was what I worked on in the state legislature. So I thought I could contribute something positive in that regard. There were two things on the top of the con list. One, my kids were 3 and 6 at the time. And there was some recognition that if I was successful in this undertaking, I'd be signing up for a 3,000-mile commute where I'd be away from them quite a bit. And the second thing on the con list was I looked at Washington, D.C. as largely repellent. The level of partisan rancor, the inability to make progress on behalf of the American people. I don't think you have to watch C-SPAN or read the Washington Post on a daily basis to have a sense that things are not working the way they ought to. And I confess, as we were about to be kicked out of this little Indian restaurant in Gig Harbor, Washington on March the 3rd of 2012 because it was closing time and we were still working on a pro and con list, I kept coming back to the top of the con list and thinking maybe that's the reason to do it. It's because I got little kids and because it's a mess. And frankly, I don't want my kids' future dictated by what's a completely screwed up federal government. And I will say that has absolutely changed, that has absolutely influenced the way I've approached this job. in terms of some of the things I've been involved with, and the Bipartisan Working Group, which I chair, which Convergence has been terrific in helping be successful in how I've gotten involved on some of these issues around the reform of Congress. I'm a big believer that the boat moves best. Listen, we are in such choppy waters right now, right? Like that, we've seen fundamental, robust, disruptive economic change. We've seen really disruptive change in our political system. And I'm a believer that the boat moves best. It's hard to get the boat where we want to go as it is. The boat moves best when all oars are in the water, at least trying to row in the same direction. It is almost impossible if half the oars are out of the water beating over the head the other half of the rowers, right? And I think that's what's challenging in our political system these days, and it's why the conversations that Convergence tries to facilitate, the work that it tries to do, is so fundamentally important.
Wow. So given what's happening now in Congress and the partisanship, are you optimistic that members can come together on these important issues and really put the American people first?
So it's interesting. I go to the Methodist Church in Gig Harbor, Washington, and every time people in my congregation for years would come up to me and say, well, first of all, it's so weird to be in a job where, people approach you as though you've been diagnosed with a terminal disease, right? I get a lot of that, like, how are you? Are you? And like, and I'm, and so I kept saying, I could not do this job if I were not a genetically optimistic person, right? It's too challenging to do all of the things you do if you don't think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that it's not an oncoming train. But it's interesting because I received there's a British rabbi who spoke of the difference between optimism and hope. He said optimism is a passive virtue. It's the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. It doesn't take courage to be optimistic. It takes courage to have hope. And I have to tell you, I've stopped calling myself optimistic and I've started calling myself hopeful because I'm not a passive player in this. I can actually do things to try to make things better, both with regard to how I invest my time and energies, with regard to how I communicate with my colleagues, with regard to what I post on social media and how I post on social media. Mm-hmm. All of these things are things that each of us can do to hopefully create more hope.
So as you talk about hope, I think about the budget process where we need a lot of hope because now we're at a place where we're less than a month away from a possible government shutdown again. Yeah. And we know the last government shutdown was catastrophic for our communities. So there are so many political issues. You've got gun violence, you've got climate change, you've got immigration. But at the end of the day, what Congress absolutely has to do, they have to pass a budget. They have to finish the appropriations process. So what reforms do you think are necessary to make sure that we are not in a position where we are facing another government shutdown again?
Yeah. I'll say up front, I think government shutdowns are, to use a legislative technical term, stupid. It's particularly damaging in a district like mine where the federal government is the largest employer. We have a large naval shipyard. We have the National Park Service, the Forest Service. I represent more military veterans than any Democrat in Congress. So we depend on the federal government actually functioning. And this kind of persistent dysfunction with regard to the budget and appropriations process is very troubling. I served last term on the last select committee, the Select Committee on Budget and Appropriations Process Reform. And I actually think as a group, though we didn't end up passing any recommendations, we started to converge on some good ideas, actually working with Convergence, who came and testified to some of the budget and appropriations process reforms that people from all different angles had come to. It included things like establishing a biannual budget process so that we're at least providing more certainty more frequently. Trying to provide some sort of an expedited path in the Senate toward getting to a bipartisan budget agreement and bipartisan spending bill, so that you might have, in essence, an off-ramp or an expedited process if you can kind of meet your marks in a timely manner. Doing things, including one that Convergence and its budget and appropriations process group identified, which is trying to elevate the issues of our long-term fiscal soundness as a country. One of the ideas that I think there was some agreement on was trying to create an annual fiscal State of the Nation address to try to elevate those sort of fiscal issues, which often lead to a misunderstanding of our realities often leads to bad decision making. And so trying to elevate those issues, not just in the Congress, but with the American people as well, is another idea. So there was a whole litany of ideas in that regard to simply try to get the process to work better. There's some other things that I would be open to. And we're talking about that on this year's Select Committee, the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. We last month had a hearing on budget and appropriations process reform, and are looking at, as a starting point, some of the recommendations that came out of last year's group, and maybe adding to it some additional ideas.
Can you share more about the Committee on Modernization and what does that look like? It sounds like a very sexy name,
totally.
Modern name.
Yeah, right.
So what does that actually?
We're burning it up on social media. It's super viral, you guys.
It's the new hot thing. So can you share more about what that is? What are your goals and what you're trying to accomplish?
So about every 20 or 30 years or so, Congress realizes things aren't working the way they ought to, and they create a committee to do something about it. This year's committee has the super catchy name of the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. And we were tasked with looking at some specific things. We've been looking at some others as well. Among the things we've been tasked with looking at are recruitment, retention, and diversity of staff within the House. I was surprised to learn this. There is not a position in the House, committee staff or personal office staff, with a median tenure of longer than 3 years. So you see a massive turnover in offices, and so it's no wonder that Congress punches below its weight when we're not able to hang on to good people. And that does not serve the interests of the American people when you have that level of turnover. And unfortunately, what fills that void is the executive branch and lobbyists. And that, again, that doesn't serve the interests of the American people. We've been asked to look at how Congress uses technology, how it onboards new technologies to engage their constituents, to solve problems together, cybersecurity issues. Congress has been described by one of my colleagues as a 18th century institution using 20th century technology to solve 21st century problems. And I think that's largely accurate. So we've now passed a number of recommendations focused on that as well. We passed some recommendations focused on staffing issues. We've been asked to look at, and we just had a hearing on the issue of schedule and calendar. Congress this year will be in Washington, D.C. for 66 full days and 65 travel days. 66 full days and 65 travel days.
Wow.
And the average member is on an average of 5.4 committees and subcommittees. And so you're trying to figure out, a lot of the conversation has been around how do you re-empower committees to solve difficult problems on behalf of the American people. That becomes difficult when you have a calendar and a schedule where I think it was Bipartisan Policy Center did a study looking at just one day in September, and they looked at one 1-hour block when committees were meeting and found that roughly a third of Congress was supposed to be in two committees, at least two committees at the same time. So it's no wonder when you are watching C-SPAN, if you watch C-SPAN, that committee members aren't always there. It's usually because they have to be in three committees at the same time. Ironically, when we had our hearing on schedule and calendar, we opened the hearing with 4 members present and 8 members in other committee hearings. By the way, not a joke. That was true. And so we're looking at potential reforms in that regard, again, to try to have Congress function better on behalf of the American people. We've looked at an issue that I think is actually really important. We just had a hearing on the issue of civility. And it was in the midst of, it was literally the week that the House formally opened the impeachment inquiry. And as you can imagine, all the press was at our hearing. Thank you. We're trying.
Right.
But, you know, some of the things we've looked at are literally from the day you arrive in Congress. When they do freshman orientation, Democrats are put on the Democratic bus and Republicans are put on the Republican bus. And trying to figure out how do you try to make it so that this is not perceived as a game to be won, but rather as problems to be solved, something I think Convergence is really good at. I will mention that's absolutely also influenced how we've approached the work of the committee. I don't have a ranking member. I have a vice chair, and a really good one, Tom Graves, who's a very conservative Republican from Georgia, but we are partners in this undertaking. Usually what happens when a committee gets formed is you get your budget for the committee, and the first thing that happens is very simple math. You divide by 2, and the Democrats get their half of the money. They generally use it to hire people of a Democratic background who put on blue jerseys when they join the team, and Republicans use their half of the money to hire people with a Republican background to put on red jerseys. And at the very beginning of this undertaking, I said to Tom, so what if we don't do that? Like, we have a lot of work to do, and what if we just agree that we'll work together to hire out a team of people of diverse backgrounds, all of whom will put on a jersey that says Fix Congress? Because we have too much to do and too little time and not enough resources if we're going to spend these months that we have to work on this fighting with each other. If you watch one of our hearings, oftentimes we stagger our seating, and we don't have Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other. We stagger our seating because during a hearing, you know what you do? You lean over to the person that you sit next to. And I actually think it's a good thing for Democrats and Republicans to talk to each other about what they're hearing from those who come to testify. When we did a hearing on another thing we've been tasked with looking at is professional development among members. How do we build a next generation of leaders within the Congress? I actually had the freshman members of our committee run the hearing. And I was told that's insane. You never give up the gavel. And I was like, well, you do if you want to actually build leaders, right? And so we're trying to do things a little bit differently. And it's, again, where I have a lot of respect for how Convergence functions, because I think that effort to try to bring in different perspectives, to look at common problems where we may have different ideas about how to solve them, but actually to try to engage in a thoughtful and collaborative way on solving them, I think that's smart. And we're really trying to replicate that in the work of the committee.
Wonderful. So I want to invite all of you into the conversation. I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A from the audience. So do we have any questions? We've got a couple here. Do I see some mics? Okay, great. We have a mic over here. Please, sir.
You called on me because the mic was here. Okay. You commented about that the press didn't cover your hearing. Is that, from your experience, is the rancorous view that people like me from the hinterland see of Congress the truth, or is that a spin that the press is putting on it? And secondly, what could you do to get the press to cover that hearing? Thank you.
I'm torn with regard to answer that question, in part because there's undeniably rancor in the Capitol and in this town. I think oftentimes the voices that are most viral on social media and that get the most attention on cable news are not folks who are working collaboratively to solve problems, but rather the folks who have the largest bones to pick. And so that's where I'm torn, is I do think I think what probably drives ratings is conflict. And so I think there's more attention paid to conflict than some of the bipartisan things that we do get done. Convergence has been involved and helpful in something that I co-chair a group in the House called the Bipartisan Working Group with Andy Barr. We're a group of a dozen Democrats and a dozen Republicans who meet each week for breakfast. It's kind of a meeting in three parts. The first part of the meeting, we go around the room, and anybody who's working on something where they want to invite collaboration or co-sponsorship is given an opportunity to make a pitch. In fact, I just pitched a bill focused on financial aid for college students, and my colleague Susan Brooks, who's a member of the Bipartisan Working Group, is my Republican co-sponsor when we introduced that bill. Second part of the meeting, we talk about what's going on in Congress that week. And those can be tough conversations, right? Because if you're talking about health care or taxes or impeachment, those can be tough conversations. But I'm increasingly of the belief that good democracy is a little bit like a good marriage. You know, you don't necessarily agree with your partner on everything, but you got to be able to talk to each other and listen to each other and not have every interaction turn into the Jerry Springer show. And then the third part of the meeting, we talk about big, hairy issues facing the country and where we may be able to find some common ground on those issues. And Convergence has been wonderfully helpful in trying to bring some of those voices into the room to have us engage on some of these tough issues. And I don't want to mislead you into thinking we're, holding hands around the room and singing Kumbaya around the table or closing our eyes and doing trust falls into each other's arms. We stopped doing that after we dropped a guy. But it is the hour of each week where I find myself thinking we need to do more of that, not just as a Congress, but as a country too. And what I will tell you is, almost without exception, no matter what room I'm in, whether it be back home in rural Washington state or here in our nation's capital, most people are surprised to know that a group like that even exists. Right, that there's even that type, and there's other groups too. The Problem Solvers Caucus does that. There's, a Civility Caucus. So I'll give you another quick example, and this is something I actually give the press some credit for. So there's a Civility Caucus. We've been doing civility exchanges, and the Bipartisan Policy Center is doing civility exchanges, where a Democrat goes to a Republican district and a Republican goes to the Democratic district. Because I think part of the idea is part of the way we get a better understanding of where people are coming from is to actually understand where people are coming from, to put eyes on their challenges. So I had Steve Womack, who's a conservative Republican from Northwest Arkansas, come to Washington State. I took him up Hurricane Ridge in the Olympic National Park, and the Park Service talked to him about the maintenance backlog within the Park Service. And as we're driving down Hurricane Ridge, he said, "Kilmer, now I understand why you're always talking about the maintenance backlog and why you're working on that issue." We went to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, and he put eyes on some of our infrastructure challenges. The Port of Tacoma did an amazing job. We went to the Port of Tacoma, and they said, here's how many containers come through our port from all over the world and end up in Arkansas. And here's how many containers come from Arkansas and end up in our port going all over the world. And we drove away from there, and he said, suddenly I care about freight mobility in the Puget Sound region. I just went to Northwest Arkansas and, got to visit students at the University of Arkansas. Turns out they care about student debt too. We met with employers large and small from his region. And interestingly enough, that did get some coverage in his paper and in mine, maybe not on MSNBC or Fox News, but it did get coverage in our local papers.
Well, it's weird enough that it's news.
Yeah.
It's so shocking that you would do that. Now, how do you get that to NBC or something?
And this gets at, you asked to some degree, so here's part of the challenge. Our politics don't necessarily lend themselves to that or reward that, right? It's why I have a great esteem for the work that Convergence does, because too often in our political system, collaboration or compromise, or you pick your word, is considered a naughty word. And listen, we're in divided government right now. If you want to fund the government, it's going to take Democrats and Republicans coming to a compromise. It means that someone's not going to get everything that they want. If we're going to do something on prescription drugs, if we are going to do an infrastructure bill, it means by the very nature of divided government that Democrats will get something that they want and Republicans will get something that they want if it's going to pass the House, pass the Senate, and be signed by this president. And, but that's not always rewarded in our political system. I know for a fact that when I've visited Republican districts, my Republican colleagues have said, they've had constituents say, what are you doing hanging out with a Democrat? And the same thing. For me, I've had people say, like, we don't want that fraternization with a In fact, the first week I had this job, 2013, January 2013, my first term I was on the Armed Services Committee. And they had every freshman member on Armed Services and Foreign Affairs go to the Pentagon. We met with the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs. On the bus back to the Capitol, we were rolling in about 7 p.m. And I stood up on the bus and said, I'm going to go grab a burger because it's my first week on the job and I'm trying to make friends, right? I'm like trying to meet new people. And we had 3 Democrats, I think it was 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, go to this burger joint on Pennsylvania Avenue. Good stuffed burgers. It's delicious. And we're sitting there having dinner and, just tell me about your district, what was your race like, that type of thing. And about 45 minutes in, I said, it seems like we ought to be able to get our crap together and get some of this stuff figured out. And one of my colleagues, who just happened to be a sort of a Tea Party Republican from the Midwest, I unfortunately could tell this story with a deep blue district Democrat. It wasn't. It was a Tea Party Republican from the Midwest. And he said, Derek, I like you. And he said, but here's what you don't understand. He said, I won my seat by defeating a Republican incumbent, and I ran against him as not being conservative enough. He said, the first vote I cast when I got to Congress was a vote against John Boehner for Speaker of the House, and I sent out a press release saying I voted against him because he's too compromising, too willing to work with Democrats. And he said, I was applauded in my district for that vote. He said, well, you don't understand. He said, my constituents didn't send me here to work with you. They sent me here to stop you. I walked out of that burger joint and I called up my wife and I said, I have 2 reactions to this. One, how incredibly honest and forthcoming. And second, oh my God, right? Like, that's a real problem. And so it's on all of us to try to figure out, how do you have a political system that doesn't reward that, right? Because we're hosed if the Venn diagram of stuff Democrats want and stuff Republicans want are circles a mile apart from each other, particularly in divided government. We are hosed. Part of legislating, it does not take political courage to stand on opposite sides of the gymnasium yelling at each other, right? It takes political courage to try to figure out, how do we actually do this hard work of solving problems? And our political system doesn't always, and Lord knows our press does not often reward that.
Yeah, I want to share a little bit from the perspective from a large nonprofit organization, and we have conversations with our United Ways all the time, and their questions are always about these big political divisions around gun violence and what's happening on climate change, and we always have to tell them there are things happening in Congress. I mean, you are hearing all this noise in the press, and some of it is there are legitimate issues. But there are policy conversations happening on issues like higher education and student loans and multiple issues that you are not hearing about because the press isn't covering it. And so a lot of our conversations are about there's stuff happening, bipartisanship is happening, you're just not hearing about it. And so we've got to really educate people about what work is happening. I don't know where we are on time. We have a few more minutes? Okay, great. I think we have 2 questions here.
Congressman, to what extent do you think the problem rests with gerrymandered districts?
I think it's a big deal. I could use the example I just gave you. I don't think it's the only problem. I think there are some systemic issues that exacerbate our challenges. Gerrymandering is one of them. Our blue districts have gotten far more blue. Our red districts have gotten far more red. And those who have swing districts are persistently on the endangered species list. Interestingly, my state has a bipartisan redistricting commission. I think that has helped in that process a bit. It's something that's part of H.R. 1 to have nonpartisan redistricting. I generally think that voters should choose their elected officials rather than elected officials choosing their voters. I think campaign finance is also part of it, which is also part of H.R. 1. There's too much money in our politics, and as a consequence, we often see disincentives towards the type of collaboration that we're talking about. But I think it's probably too easy to just chalk it up to some of those systemic issues. The reality is the American people are divided too. I think that's a harder nut to crack. I mean, when every now and then when I'm back home in my district and my team doesn't know what to do with me, they send me to go stand on people's porches. I just say, hey, I'm Derek Kilmer. I represent you. What's on your mind? And in summer of 2017, I wasn't doing it as a candidate. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just asking for what's on your mind. I went to a door in the north end of Tacoma, which is a pretty blue area. And I said, hey, I'm Derek Kilmer. I'm your congressman. What's on your mind? And the gentleman at the door said, do you know anyone who voted for Donald Trump? And I said, you know what? 3 of the 6 counties I represent voted for Donald Trump. I know a lot of someones who voted for Donald Trump. And he said, you know what? I don't know anyone who voted for Donald Trump. He said, it strikes me that's a problem. He said, I did something weird. I went on my Facebook page and I said, I would like to take a Trump voter out for coffee because I want to understand how you think better. And I said, so what happened? He said, all my Democratic friends called me a traitor and a bunch of people I didn't know called me a effing snowflake. So I think part of the test of, part of the test of us, and I actually, again, not to keep coming back to the value of the work that Convergence is doing, part of the test of how we foster more civility is to break through some of those very deep divisions that we are facing in this country is how do we interact with each other better? Right? I get the luxury of doing that because I represent a big and diverse district, and I get to go into deeply conservative areas. And guess what? I represent them too, even though I'm a Democrat. And I get to go into deep blue areas who think maybe I talk to Republicans too much. And I represent them too. And I get to go into every area of my district. And we got to figure out how to communicate with each other better as American people. I think that's a tougher nut to crack. But it's on all of us.
I think we have one more question.
Could you tell us a little bit about the attitude of the House leadership, present round and past round, toward the bipartisan efforts you're talking about? Do they say, get lost? Do they say, show me?
You know what? I give the leadership great credit. I give Chairman McGovern and Speaker Pelosi great credit for creating the Modernization Committee. And I give Leader McCarthy great credit. I mean, he showed up. We had a member day hearing. The speaker testified, Steny Hoyer testified, Leader McCarthy testified. When Leader McCarthy came, he said, I only regret that I didn't think to create a committee like this. And he came in with a lot of good ideas. And so far we've heard nothing but encouragement for the work we're doing to try to reform Congress, because everybody wants to see the place function. You know, each of us, whether we come from far away or closer by, travel to this city because we want to make a difference on behalf of the American people. And I think there's an understanding that it's not working the way we want it to. So I think there's hope that we can solve some of this.
Sounds like we have a little bit more time for questions. Do we have any questions on this side of the room?
I promise to make all of my answers far longer.
Mike is coming.
Mine's really just a statement and not a question, but it's very short. I'm the director of the Institute for Civil Political Communications at Shepherd University, and the work that you're doing is just fabulous. I hope you keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'll pray for you and the work you're doing.
Our theme song is The Impossible Dream.
There you go.
Great. We have another question over here in the middle.
So I was struck by your comment that there are as many travel days as work days in the Congress, and that together they amount to less than a third of the year. What happens in the other 2/3, and isn't there an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not quite sure yet how our committee is going to land on that. But I think, again, and my reaction to this is not as someone who doesn't like spending quality time with the people of Alaska Airlines. That's not my complaint. My complaint is I don't think there's enough time for the committees to do the work that they're tasked with doing. And there's, at the very least, we have to figure out some ideas to deconflict the committee schedule, because there's too many times where members have to be in multiple places at the same time. I would argue it's very difficult to do that with that in a way that's divorced from the conversation around calendar. There's some other things at play here too. If you talk to either long tenured people or people who used to serve here, they say, well, back in the day we were here for longer periods of time and we had our families here, and that fostered greater civility as well. I see a fair amount of nodding heads in this room. Maybe there's truth to that. I think that ship has probably sailed, though. Depending upon what you do with the calendar, it may change up the incentives around where you have your family. Here's what I would say, though, and this reflects your question. When we're not in Washington, D.C., I'm not on vacation sipping Mai Tais. I'm running into every nook and cranny of my district. I'm doing town hall meetings. I am, as I did for the last 2-week district work period, visiting 9 college campuses. I am, engaging my constituents very directly and trying to be available and accessible and accountable to them as the person who represents them. And I think that's what most members do, and there's value in that too. Some of the ideas that have been kicked around, and I'm always reticent to even float this because I'm not saying we're going to do this, but you had in open public hearing some conversation about the idea of having members come. So if you use, this week is unusual because of the death of my colleague Elijah Cummings, where Congress would have otherwise been here and in session today voting on things. But on a traditional week, the sort of a formal start of the week is we have votes at 6:30 on a Monday. So I will, on that day, leave my home at 5:30, go to SeaTac Airport, get on a plane, arrive at about 4:30, and we have votes at 6:30. Then you'll have a full day Tuesday, a full day Wednesday, and on Thursday, we are usually done voting by noon, at which place everybody heads home to their districts. For me, I can't go home until there's a available flight, which used to be 7 and is now 5:15. And then, so that's what an average week looks like. There's been some discussion of saying, well, what if instead of that, we started on a Monday and maybe do the same Monday on the first week of the month, where you'd start with the 6:30 vote, and then you'd work Tuesday, full day, Wednesday, full day, Thursday, full day, Friday, full day, till 5, right? And then you'd start the next Monday at 9 a.m., which means for me, I wouldn't go home, right? I would stay over the weekend, and probably most West Coast members would stay home. We've really come to hate the people from Maryland and Virginia. But I would likely stay. But the benefit of, and then maybe, so you do that for 2 weeks, and then maybe you have a district work period for the next 2 weeks. What that does, it's actually kind of unusual. It's an unusual math experiment, because somehow when you do that, you create more days in Washington, D.C., more full days for committees to meet, and actually more days in the district. What you create less of is quality time with me and the people of Alaska Airlines. I don't think that's nuts. Now, there's no perfect calendar, right? As a parent, the thought of not seeing my children for 2 weeks aggrieves me and aggrieves many members of Congress who are parents. What perhaps causes me more pain is the notion of being away from them without us actually getting things done, right? And so maybe if you look at some of these reforms, Congress starts doing more on behalf of the American people. So we'll see.
Okay, on that note, and we're going to have to wrap up in a minute, but how can we support the work that you're doing to make sure that Congress is more effective at getting stuff done for the American people?
Well, let me say up front, you look at, for example, how Convergence has engaged with the Bipartisan Working Group, helping to bring in outside speakers, helping us kind of tee up discussions where we can try to find some common ground. That has been wildly helpful. And I would be remiss if I didn't just explicitly say thank you for that. Beyond that, as we look at these reform efforts, I've been very grateful for the degree to which not just Convergence, but other reform-oriented groups have engaged with us, because we can't do this on our own. we don't have the staffing to solve all of these problems. We didn't get. We have neither the time nor the budget to dive as deep as I wish we could on all of these things on our own, which means that every person in here is a force multiplier. You know, I ran through some of the things that we are tasked with looking at, and we want to deputize every American, and particularly groups like those in this room and people like those in this room. If you have an idea of how we can solve for some of this, we need your help. We need your help. And so I invite that. If we've the committee on the Modernization of Congress has a website with a portal for actually contributing ideas. If you have a suggestion for how we can engage, call me. Call our office, and we'll sit down or put you to work sitting down with a member of our team. Because I really do think that I guess this goes back to your first or second question. My first year in this job, I represent a big Navy base. And it was Armed Forces Day, and there was a very senior member of the Navy who spoke at the Armed Forces Day dinner in my district. And I went up and he said, "How's it going back there?" And I said, "Well, it's a bit of a fixer-upper." And I said, "Sometimes this feels like turning a battleship." And he said, "Well, Derek, I actually used to captain a battleship." And he said, "What I have found is targeted and strategic course correction over time can make a really big difference." And he said, "You just need to have a good crew." And so I invite you all to be part of our crew. And I am confident that targeted and strategic course correction over time will make a very big difference. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you.